Hopefully you had a chance to see the teaser we showed earlier that gave a quick overview of who these folks are. Before we ask you to share your story, could you just quickly introduce yourselves? Amanda?
I'm Amanda Kalinsky.
Sonia Vallabh.
Trevor, Baierl.
And maybe a line about what you do.
I am on the CJD Foundation Board of Directors, and I kind of serve as the reproductive options person.
I run a prion disease and therapeutic development lab in Cambridge, Massachusetts with my husband, Eric Minical.
And I'm on the CJD board and admire these two and do some videos and TV stuff.
Okay. So at this point, I'd like to give you each a few minutes to share your story, 3 to 5. And Amanda, are you comfortable starting?
Sure.
Great.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. I have to write mine down. I get very nervous. I'm doing this for a while, but I still get nervous. My name's Amanda Kalinsky. I'm really happy to be here again and see all these faces that I've missed so much. So I'm happy to be here not only as a member of the Foundation's Board of Directors, but also as a family member and an affected individual. Many of you have heard my story before, but I see a lot of new faces here, so I'm going to start from the beginning and try to make it as short as I can. In 2009, I made the decision to undergo genetic testing to determine if I would follow in the footsteps of my grandfather, great-grandfather, father, uncle, aunt, cousin, and be the 6th generation of my family afflicted with GSS. 8 weeks after testing, I received positive test results for the F198S pathogenic variant. Receiving these positive test results meant that if my disease progression is similar to my father's, who passed away in 2010 after a 6-year battle with GSS, in my early 50s, I'll start to display the first symptoms and will pass away as I enter into my late 50s. So at the age of 26, in my mind at that time, I was handed a death sentence. I was faced with making some decisions about my life I never thought I would have to make, let alone at such a young age. One of these decisions was whether or not I would have children. I'd always wanted to have kids, but with these results, I knew one thing for sure, and that was that I could not bring a child into this world knowing that they would have a 50% chance of inheriting this mutation. Doing that would only allow GSS to potentially affect a 7th generation, and for me, that was just not an option. So I decided to not have children. I was heartbroken until an alternative solution was presented to me during a research study visit at UCSF. It was there that I was told by a genetic counselor about a reproductive option I had never heard of, but that had the potential to work. It was an option that would not only allow me to fulfill my dream of being a mom to my own biological children, but one that would serve to eradicate GSS from all future generations of my family. And that option was called in vitro fertilization with pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. So what that is a screening test that's performed on embryos created via IVF to genetically analyze them before transfer. It's a months-long process that is just exhausting in every way possible, but it was one that I ultimately decided to give a shot. I decided to go through it for lots of different reasons, but just a few are pretty important to me. The first one is I did it for my dad. My dad was a small-town family doctor, but he was also my hero. He loved life. He loved his community, his family. He got sick at age 52 and then died at age 58. He never got the chance to fully live his life, but he really fought hard to do so until the end. He gave me the strength I needed to fight back, too, in my own way. And then the second reason I did it was I did it for us. For this community. I did it for me, but I did it for you guys too. I figured that besides being involved in these just incredible research studies that we've heard about this weekend, there was nothing that I could personally do to stop this disease. So IVF with PGD was a brand new thing for the prion disease community. So I figured that if it worked for me, it could potentially work for you. It could give us some of our power back. We could actually do something to beat these diseases at their own game. And then 3, the most important reason is, I've given this speech so many years and I always cry at this part. I did it for them, for the one sitting at the table over there. When I look in the mirror, I see GSS. I see what it's done to my family. But when I look at them, I don't. I see hope. I see hope for a brighter future for my family and then for a lot of other families in this room. PGD gave me the ability to protect them. And I find power and love and courage in the fact that as far as my family is concerned, this disease stops with me. It's done. So 8 years ago, through a case study published in JAMA Neurology, I was identified as the first woman in history to undergo IVF with PGD for a genetic prion disease. Since then, my family's been featured in the New York Times and then in the book that you see out front called Mercies in Disguise. Through the foundation, I've also been able to use my story to help counsel couples through their reproductive options when faced with a genetic prion disease. And I did a little count this morning, and I think 10 prion disease-free children have been born now through IVF with PGD, that I know of at least. And I'm sure that there are many more to come. And for me, these little beacons of hope that we have around us make it all worth it. So thank you. That's my story.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Sonia Vallabh. Many of you have heard me speak before, but I'll give you a quick background on my family. So in 2010, my mom got mysteriously ill. It was a year that many of you in this room could identify with. It was very, very rapid and totally unexplained decline. We only learned from her autopsy that she had died of genetic prion disease. It was the D178N mutation, and there was actually no family history in my family, so this was a total shock. So it was after getting that information that my husband Eric and I made the decision, but for us it came very naturally to immediately want to get predictive genetic testing to know what we were up against. And unfortunately the test did not go our way. And so it was late 2011 that we learned that I had inherited my mom's mutation. Prior to this point, we had been on really different career tracks than what we do now. So I trained as a lawyer, Eric trained as a transportation engineer and city planner. This was highly motivating information for us, and I'll spare you a lot of the boring details, but we found ourselves inspired to make a career change and ended up training up in biomedicine in order to work on developing a therapy for prion disease. That's what we do today. So we run a lab of 11 people in Cambridge, Massachusetts. The mission of the lab is a therapy in our lifetimes. We're very, very lucky to have good people. And I guess I'll say just a couple words about what I think our pretty unique role as patient scientists has done for our ability to do this work. I think that we have been tremendously lucky to find really powerful allies, academics and clinicians, companies, pharma and biotech. We interface with FDA a lot, exhaustingly often. And I think part of what I see in the relationships that we're able to build is that we are front and center, and we have been from day one, about the nature of our commitment, that this is a personal and scientific commitment, and it is absolute. And I think people really respond to that. And I have been really gratified that we had, the instinct early on to lead with the fact that we have a deep personal commitment to this, because I think we've seen people rise to that. And I see it in my professional life. I also see it in my personal life. I think I've been really blessed to have a lot of people open up to me about what they carry in their family. And maybe it's not genetic prion disease, but a lot of families, a lot of people are carrying around something. And working in the rare disease space, not just prion disease, but the broader community. Some of you know this about Boston, but it is just like, not just in the universe, but in like the multiverse, there's no place more suited to doing drug development. It's outstanding. We interface with a lot of people who are working on a lot of different diseases, and that has been good for me in expanding my circle of empathy and feeling the way in which I and all of us here are not alone, despite medicine's tendency to, split instead of lump and to tell you, oh my God, what you have is so unimaginably rare and tragic. Actually, when we broaden our lens a little bit, there are so many people and there are so many families that carry so much. And I have found this experience has grown me tremendously in being able to see that. And maybe in some way being able to help. The other thing I wanted to say about the larger context of rare disease is that if we zoom out a little bit, there are very, very few comparably rare diseases that have as much as we have. Now, it is hard to sit in this room and feel lucky, but you can't find an asset like the surveillance center in any other comparably rare disease. You can't find a diagnostic as good as RT-Quick. And you can't find a molecular story about the cause of the disease that is more clear. We have a single gene that we have to go after. We know what we have to do to it. And I think it's a combination of all of the science that came before us and the biotechnological moment at which we're operating. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, different story, different world. But I think that we are in a moment of sea change right now, and we see it every day. And honestly, if I thought we had no chance to develop a life-saving therapy in our lifetimes, my life would probably be more relaxing. I probably would have come to a different peace a long time ago. But when I tell you that things are possible, not guaranteed, not promised to us, but possible right now that have never been possible before, I'm not talking about the next generation. I'm talking about the people next to me right now. So I really, really believe that, and we are working ourselves into the ground for it. And I want you guys to take away a feeling of hope from this weekend. It's a different world than when I got into this game 13 years ago.
Okay, it's always hard to follow after her, or both of them, so. But I'll be kind of quick. So 10 years ago is when my story really began, when my mom passed away. We were lucky enough that her father had CJD on his death certificate in 1976, which is very bizarre. So we were able to figure out what was going on with her through the blood test and find out that it was a genetic form. What I found was the lack of information out there readily available, and the resources. The foundation was there, which was fantastic. So I did come to the conference, shortly after we went through our process. And my day job is producing TV and film. So I felt like the one thing that I could do, because I'm not gonna, change my life and become a researcher. Nobody wants that. So the one thing I could do was try to fill that void, and what I did was create a documentary about my journey, kind of from the moment of my mom and what she was going through. I basically bought a camera so I could start documenting what she was going through, and I put it out and created One in a Million, the documentary. There's a few things in there now when I look back at the 10 years that I regret putting in. One was Storm the Capitol. That didn't age so well. But I think the information that came through that with the help of, Dr. Geschwin and the foundation and many others is still pertinent and still helpful for families. And I know that because I have people reach out to me almost monthly, several times a year. Some of them come through the foundation, some come directly. Sometimes it's a friend of a friend that says, oh my gosh, I watched your documentary and I'm going through this. I was wearing my Cure CJD shirt in Vegas one year for March Madness, and a guy came across the room and said, we just got this diagnosis. So my goal and what I'm trying to do, and this is in regards to some of the last words my mom spoke to me, was fight for me. So my goal is to get that information out there and help tell the stories, fill that void where the gaps are in information, hopefully correct misinformation, make sure that these people get their stories told. I know Amanda's mad because she didn't make it in my documentary, but I was intimidated by her. Sonia was fantastic. Her and Eric were a part of it, and it's the part that I can do, because I'm not going to fundraise, I'm not going to do some of these other things, but if I can help put a voice out there and help everybody find what they need and direct them to the foundation, that's what I'm here to do. And Petey's here to help me. So.
So a common theme with this group, because thank God they are so open with their personal story, it attracts a lot of other people who want to ask them questions. So what help or guidance do you find yourself giving families most often? Trevor, you want to start?
Sure. So I think one big question that comes up on the genetic side is, when you find out it's in your family, do you get tested? And it's a very, very personal decision that you have to make, and there is no right answer. It's what you feel. I know for us, it was like obvious. I had to know and, understand what might lie ahead for me. But it may not be the right thing. I have family members who have not gotten tested because they feel like at this point they don't know that there's anything they can do about it, so they'd rather, live life and not think about it. I knew I was going to be thinking about it all the time anyway, so I may as well get the answer. And, so I've had people come and ask me, like, what do they think? Am I still too far? Okay. I always feel like my voice projects more than it does. So I think that's one of the important questions, and I think it's a question that needs to be discussed openly by each individual person. You can't make that decision in a bubble, and I think it's good to be able to help other people sort of form that idea.
And of course, we always recommend genetic counseling, but I think having your peer perspective is just irreplaceable. It's wonderful. Sonia, how about you? What do you most often get asked and advise on?
Sure. Well, to pick up on Trevor's theme, I think, Eric and I have advocated really fiercely that we need to think about treating not just in the symptomatic phase of disease, but also preventively in people who know that they're at high risk. And you guys are very, very well positioned to appreciate that by the time a patient is symptomatic, the rate at which things happen is unbelievable. It's unbelievable. And it is so hard to describe to somebody who hasn't seen it. Now, I very much want to work towards both goals. I think people have more of a picture in their heads of how you do a clinical trial in symptomatic patients. There's much less precedent out there in the world for how you prevent a disease wholesale based on somebody carrying a variant in their DNA. But we can detect that variant anytime, right? As we are evidence of. You can just get your blood drawn while you're still perfectly healthy. You can have all this advance notice. We can't squander that. It's too precious. So while Trevor is absolutely correct that genetic testing, predictive genetic testing, is not for everybody at risk, I do think when I look at all of the data that our lab has generated and connect the dots to data from other people generated over decades, molecularly, it is not unique to prion disease that it will be easier to intervene upstream than it will be to intervene downstream. I want to do both, but and there's not just the molecular picture, there's sort of the regulatory picture, there's the convincing everybody that this is the plan part of the picture, but I do think we have to lean into that. And it is going to be, at some point the case that by getting predictive genetic testing, people will be able to think preventively about clinical trials or drugs that exist. They will open up a new treatment potential that won't be there in the same way at the point where symptomatic disease happens. So I think we end up talking to people a lot about those sort of complicated pros and cons. The other question that we get a lot, it sort of boils down to, why is drug development so hard? And God, it really is. Like, sometimes I think that what we're trying to do is not less ambitious than the moon landing. It is unbelievably complex. And I think that the sea change that we're in right now, where I am very much a believer that we are going to start seeing clinical trials of genetically targeted therapies with strong evidence from the lab behind them, and this will be a first for prion disease, and we're gonna start seeing these over the next few years. Huge milestone, and also it's gonna open up a whole new vista of challenges, right? So a first clinical trial will have a number of people that it can enroll, and that number is not gonna be what we want it to be. It's gonna have a number of sites, and those sites are not gonna exist everywhere we wanna see them. There are gonna be parameters around what we can do in the short and a half versus medium terms. And there's so much potential for hope and hype and disappointment, new kinds of disappointment and frustration as we go. But what I really want to ask is that we see it all, that we manage, despite being so close to it and despite it being so hard, to see it all as the road forward, which is what it is. It's all carrying us forward. And, I have a quote here that I come back to all the time. Some of you are probably familiar with this, but I've almost maybe never read anything in my life that seemed more like it had come somehow out of my own brain. Okay. This is from Admiral Stockdale. Some of you might know. He was a prisoner of war in Vietnam for 7 years, and he was asked when he got out by an interviewer, who made it, who didn't make it? And he said, oh, that's easy. The prisoners of war who didn't make it were the people who had a real specific hope, and they just fixed themselves on it. And that hope was, I'll be out by Christmas. I'll be out by Easter. And then Christmas would come and go, or Easter would come and go. And it would crush them, right? They would die of despair when they were not out by those goal dates. What he said was, you must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they might be. So that's kind of my wish for all of us. I wish the current reality was less brutal, and I wish it was going to get less brutal faster. But I think that ultimate faith, and maybe that first trial comes along and you're like, oh my God, like my variant, I'm not eligible, or like this isn't close enough to where I live. We need to move through these stages to shine a light on everybody in this room and everybody not in this room. And that's where we're all going together. And we got to grit our teeth through all the steps and get there.
Amanda, tough act to follow, I realize.
Good job. So I'm often asked, just from kind of my story, I'm often asked some really personal, what should I do questions. And I always say to everyone, and it's very true, although it sounds a little cliche, your decision in the end is always the right one. My decision for myself was the right one for me. Your decision for yourself is the right one for you. The only thing that I do ask is that the decision is made not in a quick way, but it's one that takes time. And we're always, we always, with these diseases, we want to act as quick as we can because there's not a lot of time. But when you have these types of large decisions, it's okay to take time. It's okay to figure out exactly what works for you and to be confident that you thought of every different scenario and you came to this conclusion and this is the right one for me. And like you said, seeking out a person that can help you think of all the different scenarios, like a genetic counselor, is just priceless. If I hadn't had one through my process, then maybe I would be in a different boat right now. But yeah, so genetic counseling and taking your time.
Well, we have 2 minutes left, and there are quite a lot of people here with us today whose families have been affected by sporadic CJD. If you could inspire the families in this room to do one thing, lightning round, what would that be?
I think you're already doing it. You're here and you're advocating for yourself and you're advocating for your family member. So you're doing it. This is a great start, and just to keep going because it helps.
I think that's right. I mean, I think this room really represents people who've chosen to lean in to what happened to us. And not everybody makes that choice. And I think actually above and beyond the tragedy of losing your loved one to CJD, I think a lot of people suffer the secondary tragedy of fighting the gap between the life they expected, the narrative that they thought they were going to live, and the one where they find themselves. And I think to be in this room means that you are finding a way to synthesize the trauma that we've all been through with the ongoing narrative of your life, which I think is the task. It is the task, and it's the place where hope comes from. So thank you.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree. Like coming here shows that you're looking for the education, the answers to understand what happened, and then also being there to support other people who may be going through it, could be going through it at some point, have gone through it, and having that community support that we have here, which is unparalleled. I think it's incredible what we do here at the conference.
Well, as I said, this was a repeat of a panel from 5 years ago, but it's like it's a completely new discussion. I'm just awed by the three of you, as always, and thank you so much from the bottom of our hearts.
Thanks.